He was 10 years old, starving, and missing his left leg when he walked past the smiling families and asked the terrifying biker for help. The Sunday morning rush at the Copper Bean was a symphony of normal life. The air smelled of roasted Arabica and expensive perfume. The espresso machine hissed, masking the low hum of conversations about weekend plans, soccer practice, and kitchen renovations. It was a sanctuary for the comfortable, a place where the biggest problem was usually a forgotten latte order. Until the door chimed, and Ethan stepped inside. Ethan didn't belong in this world of comfort. He was a ghost in dirty sneakers, his clothes hanging off a skeletal frame that looked far too fragile to support the weight of his own existence. But it wasn't his thinness that made the room go quiet. It was the way he moved. He dragged his left leg. It was a heavy, lifeless thing, a poorly fitted prosthetic that didn't just hinder him, it hurt him. Every step was a calculation of pain. Clunk, drag, wince, clunk, drag, wince. He stood in the entryway, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal searching for a hole in the fence. He wasn't looking for a handout. He wasn't looking for the bathroom. He just wanted to sit down before his leg gave out. He just wanted to be invisible, but in a room full of beautiful people, his brokenness was a spotlight. Ethan took a breath and limped toward the first table. It was occupied by a young couple, deeply in love, sharing a pastry. They looked kind. They looked safe. Ethan opened his mouth to speak, his voice trembling. "Excuse me?" Before he could finish the sentence, the woman turned her body away. It was a subtle movement, a sharp geometric rejection. She didn't look at his face. She looked at his dirty shirt. She shook her head. "Not here. You ruined the view." Ethan's shoulders slumped. He swallowed the lump in his throat and kept moving. The second table was a fortress of industry. 3 businessmen in sharp suits were reviewing documents, their coffees arranged like chess pieces. As Ethan approached, the man in the center looked up. His eyes met Ethan's for a fraction of a second, just long enough to register the boy's existence, and then he looked back down. They became intensely focused on their papers, erecting a wall of silence. To them, Ethan wasn't a child in pain. He was a distraction. He was static. The rejection stung worse than the sores rubbing against his stump. But Ethan was desperate. His good leg was trembling now. He approached a third table. A mother sat there with her 2 children, who were happily coloring on playmats. Surely a mother would understand. Surely she would see a child who needed a rest. Ethan stepped forward. The woman's head snapped up. Her eyes narrowed. She didn't smile. She reached out and pulled her own children closer, shielding them as if Ethan carried a contagious disease. "Where are his parents?" she asked loudly, casting a look around the room that demanded an answer from the management. She didn't ask, "Are you okay?" She didn't ask, "Are you lost?" She just asked why he was allowed to exist in her space. Ethan's face burned with a shame hot enough to melt steel. He backed away, the clunk of his plastic leg sounding like a gavel striking a judge's bench. Everyone said no. Everyone. Except for the corner. In the back of the shop, in the shadows away from the window, sat the darkness everyone else was trying to ignore. His name was Marcus. He was a mountain of a man, 41 years old, 6'3" and built like a slab of granite. He wore a leather vest that creaked when he moved, adorned with patches that usually made people cross the street to avoid him. He had a scar cutting through his left eyebrow and another tracing the line of his jaw, souvenirs from a life lived on the pavement. His arms were a tapestry of ink that told stories of violence, loyalty, and blood. Marcus was drinking his coffee black, reading a paperback and minding his own business. He was the scariest thing in the shop. Ethan had no other choice. The boy limped past the staring eyes of the good people and stopped in front of the monster in the corner. Marcus sensed the presence before he saw it. He slowly lowered his book. He looked at the boy. He saw the dirt smudged on the pale cheek, his chest heaving with exhaustion. Ethan's voice was a whisper, a sound so fragile it barely survived the air conditioning. "Please, "Can I sit here? Everyone else said no." The coffee shop held its breath. The mother watched, ready to be horrified. The businessman watched, ready to be vindicated. Marcus looked at the empty chair opposite him. Then he looked at the boy's trembling leg. He didn't smile. He didn't offer pity. He simply kicked the chair out with his heavy boot. "Yeah, kid," Marcus rumbled, his voice like gravel grinding together. "Sit." Relief hit Ethan so hard his knees buckled. He moved toward the chair, but his prosthetic dragged on the floor. He stumbled. In a blur of motion, Marcus moved. The monster didn't recoil. He reached out and caught the boy, his large, scarred hand steadying Ethan's frail frame with surprising gentleness. "Easy," Marcus muttered. As he helped Ethan into the chair, his oversized sleeve rode up his arm. Marcus froze. His eyes locked onto Ethan's forearm. There, blooming across the pale skin, were bruises. They weren't the blue-green scrapes of a kid falling off a bike. They were yellow and purple. And they were specific. They were fingerprints.
Marcus knew those marks. He had seen them in prison. He had seen them on the streets. Those were the marks of an adult hand squeezing hard enough to crush hope. They circled the upper arm in a pattern of possession and rage. Marcus's jaw tightened until his teeth ached. He slowly released the boy and sat back down. The atmosphere at the table had shifted. This was no longer a coffee break. It was a crime scene investigation. "What's your name?" Marcus asked softly. "Ethan," the boy whispered. "You hungry, Ethan?" Ethan nodded, his eyes wide. He looked at Marcus as if the man had just offered him a diamond. Marcus flagged down a waitress. He didn't look at a menu. Sandwich, chips, hot chocolate, now. When the food arrived, Ethan didn't eat like a normal 10-year-old. He didn't pick at the crust or play with the chips. He stared at the plate like it was a hallucination. "Go ahead," Marcus said. "It's yours." Ethan attacked the food. His hand shook as he lifted the sandwich. He took massive, desperate bites, barely chewing before swallowing. He ate with one eye on the sandwich and one eye on Marcus, as if he expected the biker to snatch it away at the last second. It was the hunger of a prisoner. Marcus watched him, his coffee forgotten. A cold fury was building in his gut, a slow-burning fire that he hadn't felt in years. "I'm not supposed to be here," Ethan mumbled through a mouthful of bread. "Where are you supposed to be?" Marcus asked. "Home." The word sounded like a sentence, not a destination. "But I couldn't stay there anymore." "Why not?" Ethan stopped chewing. The sandwich dropped from his fingers onto the plate. His lip quivered. The dam that had been holding back months of terror finally broke. Tears spilled over his lashes, washing streaks through the dirt on his face. He didn't make a sound at first, but then a sob ripped through his chest, loud and jagged. "He hurts me," Ethan choked out. "My uncle. After my parents died, after I came to live with him, everything changed." Marcus leaned in. The rest of the coffee shop disappeared. "How'd you lose your leg, Ethan?" Ethan looked down at the table, shame flooding his face. "He said it was an accident. We were in the garage. He was backing out his truck." Ethan paused, his breathing hitching. "But he knew I was there, Marcus. He saw me. He looked right at me in the mirror, and he didn't stop." The air in the corner of the shop turned into ice. "An accident?" Marcus repeated, the word tasting like bile. "That's what he told the police," Ethan cried. "But last week, I heard him on the phone." Ethan looked up, his eyes terrified, imparting a secret that was too heavy for a child to carry. "He told someone, if something happens to the kid, I get everything. The house, the insurance, all of it." Marcus sat perfectly still. It wasn't just abuse. It wasn't just neglect. The man, this uncle, had already taken the boy's leg. Now he was starving him to weaken him. He was waiting for the boy to die so he could cash a check. "He locks the pantry," Ethan whispered, the words tumbling out now. He says I don't deserve to eat if I can't do my chores, but I'm 10 and my leg hurts. I can't do everything he wants. He got $500,000 from my parents, Ethan sniffled, but he says I'm too expensive. He bought a new truck, a new TV, but he says there's no money for me. Marcus's fists clenched under the table. His knuckles turned white. He looked at the bruises on the boy's arm, the fingerprints of a man who was slowly squeezing the life out of his own blood relative for profit. Marcus stood up slowly. Ethan gasped, shrinking back into his chair. Panic flashed in his eyes. He thought he had said too much. He thought the scary man was leaving him, just like everyone else. "You're not leaving me, are you?" Ethan's voice cracked, high and desperate. Marcus paused. He looked at the terrified child, then down at his own leather vest, the symbol of a world that operated on a different code, a code where you didn't hurt children, a code where monsters got what they deserved. Marcus knelt down on the dirty coffee shop floor, ignoring the gasps of the patrons nearby. He brought his scarred face level with Ethan's tear-stained one. "I'm not leaving you ever," Marcus growled, and it sounded like a vow forged in iron. Marcus stood up and walked to the door. He didn't call the police. Not yet. The police needed evidence. The police had protocols. Marcus needed something stronger. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he knew by heart. "Brick, it's Marcus," he said into the receiver. "What's up, brother?" The voice on the other end was rough, sounding like gravel mixed with whiskey. Marcus looked back through the window at Ethan, who was watching him with the desperate hope of the condemned. "Child abuse," he said, his voice deadly calm. "Possible murder plot. I need every brother within 20 miles at the Copper Bean, now." There was a brief silence on the line, then the sound of a chair scraping against a floor. "Say no more," Brick replied. "We're coming." Marcus hung up. He looked at the horizon. A storm was coming, and it wasn't made of rain. It was made of chrome, leather, and righteous fury. The storm arrives. 20 minutes later, the comfortable Sunday silence of Madison Avenue was shattered. It didn't start with a siren. It started with a rumble, a low-frequency vibration that rattled the teaspoons in the saucers of the Copper Bean. Then they appeared. Around the corner rolled a phalanx of chrome and black leather, 30 motorcycles. Not weekend warriors, but patches from 3 counties, men who had dropped their tools, their lunches, and their families because the code demanded it. When a brother calls for help involving a child, you don't ask questions. You ride. They parked in a wall of steel outside the coffee shop. The normal customers inside looked terrified, but Ethan, watching through the glass, didn't look scared. For the first time in his life, he looked protected. Brick walked in first. He was older than Marcus, with a gray beard and eyes that had seen everything twice. He walked straight to the table, ignoring the stares. "Fill me in," Brick commanded. Marcus laid it out, his voice low and dangerous. The starvation, the accident, the bruises, the insurance money. By the time he finished, the air around the table felt heavy with impending violence. "Where is he?" Brick asked, his voice deceptively calm. "Still at the house, as far as we know," Marcus replied. Brick nodded. He turned to the room full of bikers. He didn't shout, he just gestured. "Tank, Ghost, you're with the kid. Keepin' safe. Daniels, get your old friends on the line. We need a squad car, and we need it 5 minutes ago." The investigation. What happened next wasn't chaos, it was military precision. While Marcus stayed glued to Ethan's side, the club went to work. 2 members, big men with gentle voices, walked down the street to the neighborhood where Ethan lived. They knocked on doors. People talk to bikers, maybe out of fear, maybe out of respect, but they talk. "Yeah, I heard screaming," one neighbor admitted, looking ashamed. I didn't want to cause trouble." Another woman confessed, "I called CPS twice. Nothing happened." Back in the coffee shop, Ghost, a man known for his silence, sat down across from Ethan. He noticed the boy trying to hide his worn-out sneakers under the table. Ghost had a daughter Ethan's age. He felt a lump in his throat. "My kid's got the same shoes," Ghost said quietly. "Size 4, right? I got a bunch she outgrew. Good ones. I'll bring 'em by." Ethan looked confused. "You don't have to." "Yeah, I do," Ghost said, his eyes wet. "That's what family does." Tank, the massive mechanic who could crush a melon with one hand, leaned in. "And listen, kid, when this is over, doctors, therapy, whatever you need, my shop pays for it. We take care of our own." Ethan looked around the circle of tattooed, scarred men. He realized something profound. He'd spent years terrified of monsters, only to find out that the real monsters wore suits and the angels wore leather. The raid. The police arrived at the uncle's house at sunset. Officer Daniels, the former cop turned biker, had made sure the responding officers knew exactly what they were walking into. They found the uncle in the driveway. He was washing his brand new truck, the one he'd bought on his dead brother's life insurance. He looked up, annoyed, holding a sponge. "Can I help you, officers?" he asked, putting on his best concerned citizen face. "Put your hands behind your back," the sergeant barked. "What? This is a mistake. I'm a grieving guardian," the uncle sputtered, trying to deploy the charm that had fooled the social workers. But the charm didn't work when the police kicked open the door to the house. The search was brief and horrifying. They found the bedroom. It was a storage closet with a lock on the outside. It smelled of mildew and old urine. There was a thin mattress on the floor and a cardboard box with 3 shirts. That was Ethan's entire world. But the smoking gun was in the kitchen. Padlocked on the pantry door was a chart. It was a logbook written in the uncle's neat handwriting. It tracked Ethan's calories like a science experiment. Monday, water only. Tuesday, 400 calories. Punishment, skip dinner. It was a systematic starvation. And in the locked desk drawer, they found the journal. The police had to pry it open. The entry from 3 days ago made the veteran sergeant have to step outside to vomit. "Kid's getting too weak to last much longer," the uncle had written. "Another month, maybe 2. Then I'm free and clear. Nobody suspects a thing." It wasn't just abuse. It was a slow-motion assassination for $500,000. The dark night. Ethan was rushed to Children's Medical Center. Marcus rode in the ambulance, holding the boy's hand the entire way. The doctors were horrified. The amputation had been butchered, a cheap, hasty job that had left nerves exposed. The prosthetic was 2 sizes too small, creating infected sores on the stump. "We can fix this," Dr. Mitchell promised, looking at Ethan's terrified face. "But it's going to be a long road." That night was the hardest. Around 3 a.m., the morphine wore off and the nightmares came. Ethan woke up screaming, thrashing against the sheets. "He found me! The truck! He's coming!" Ethan shrieked. Marcus, who had refused to leave the room despite the nurse's protests, was there instantly. He pulled his chair to the bed rail. "Look at me, Ethan," Marcus said, his voice cutting through the panic. "He's not coming. There are 30 men outside in the parking lot right now. Nobody gets past them. You hear me? Nobody." Ethan collapsed back onto the pillows, sweating and shaking. He looked at Marcus with eyes that seemed too old for his face. "You really want me?" he whispered, his voice breaking. "Even though unbroken?" Marcus felt his heart shatter. He reached out and brushed a lock of hair from the boy's forehead. "You're not broken, kid. You're the bravest man I've ever met. And yeah, I'd be lucky to be your family." The verdict. 3 weeks later, the courtroom was packed, not with suits, but with leather vests. The judge, Patricia Chen, looked at the file, then at the uncle in the orange jumpsuit, and then at the large biker standing next to the small boy. "Ethan," Judge Chen said softly, "is there someone you feel safe with?" Ethan didn't hesitate. He grabbed Marcus's scarred hand with both of his. He looked the judge in the eye. "Him," Ethan said. "He saved me." The judge turned to Marcus. "Mr. Stone, this is a permanent responsibility. Do you understand?" "I know, ma'am," Marcus said, standing tall. "And I want that." The gavel came down. The nightmare was legally over. Epilogue. The ride home.
6 months later, the backyard of Marcus's house was filled with balloons, streamers, and the smell of barbecue. It was Ethan's 11th birthday. Ethan wasn't the same ghost who had limped into the coffee shop. He had gained weight, his cheeks were rosy, and he was walking on a new, high-tech prosthetic that Tank's auto shop had fundraised to buy. The whole chapter was there. Ghost was pushing Ethan on the tire swing. Brick was manning the grill. Sophie, the barista from the Copper Bean, had brought a 3-layer cake with blue frosting. When they brought out the cake, the singing was loud and off-key. Ethan stood in front of the candles, grinning so hard his face hurt. "Make a wish," someone yelled. Ethan looked at Marcus, who was smiling proudly from the porch. "I already got it," Ethan said. After the cake, the brothers fired up their bikes. 30 engines roared to life in unison, a sound that used to scare people, but to Ethan, it sounded like a lullaby. Marcus lifted Ethan onto the back of his Harley. He steadied the boy as Ethan wrapped his small arms around Marcus's leather-clad vest. "Ready, son?" Marcus shouted over the engine. Ethan pressed his face against the cool leather of the vest, right over the patch that meant brotherhood. "I'm home," he whispered. And as they rode off into the golden afternoon sun, surrounded by a cavalcade of iron angels, Ethan finally believed it.